community Yom Iyun. Really a pleasure to welcome everyone this morning. Our Yom Iyun is really a highlight of the Mayanot year. It represents the kind of deep and enriching Talmud Torah that defines Mayanot. And we're very excited to welcome you this morning. I'm sure our shared learning will enhance all of our experiences of the upcoming Chagim. And I'm grateful to the Stamen family for sponsoring today's learning in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Mr. Stamen's father, Shalom Tzvi ben Aaron, Shalom Stamen Zichrono Livracha. I'm honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Rabbi Jeremy Weider. Rabbi Weider is the Joseph and Gwendolyn Strauss Professor of Talmud at the Reitz Seminary of YU and an adjunct professor of Bible at Yeshiva College. He's the scholar in residence at Congregation Kehilas Yeshurun in Manhattan. A graduate of Yeshiva College, he was ordained by Reitz and holds a PhD in Jewish Studies from New York University. Rabbi Weider's teaching is known both for its erudition and for its inspiring religious depth and thoughtfulness. We in our own school community were recently very moved by his profound and passionate statement of principles regarding Talmud Torah for women. And really every time, and every time I hear a shiur from Rabbi Weider, I'm just moved by its compelling clarity and depth, and I feel truly honored to welcome him to Mayanot this morning.
Thank you very much. Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, in the last section, in the third section, somewhat famously places Torah, particularly Torah Shebichsav, in a historical context. And he attributes or connects any number of commandments, prohibitions of the Torah to surrounding circumstances in the world of the ancient Near East. People are often perhaps disturbed by some of these similarities, but unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, they shouldn't be disturbed because it's sort of a misapprehension of what the comparisons entail. Another way of putting it is that what's more important to think about when comparing the Torah to the surrounding historical context in which it was given is not so much the similarities but the differences. Clearly, Torah Shebichsav is in some ways a product of a certain era, but what really makes it stand out is sometimes the obvious and sometimes the subtle differences between what the Rebbeinu Shalom commanded us and what were sort of the norms in the surrounding society. And what I wanted to begin by focusing on this morning is one of those particular passages where in this particular context the contrast is striking, but without the ancient Near Eastern context, you might be puzzled by I wouldn't say the import, but simply the fact that the Torah chose to say what it said. The verse in question is from Parshas Kiseitze. We read it a few weeks ago. Is lo yimsu avos avanim uvanim lo yimsu avos ish becheto yumasim. The notion that a court may not punish vicariously, a court may not punish one person for the sins of others. But particularly the way it's formulated is not simply punishing one person for the sins of others, but punishing the children for the sins of the fathers for the sins of the children. And this seems a little bit strange because it would, in the Beis Medrash, our response to reading this pasuk might be pshita, ma'ika mashmalan. Of course, why would you think otherwise? Why would one think that you could punish a child for the sins of the parents or a parent for the sins of the child? And certainly, you might understand a little bit why you punish the parents for the sins of the child if you hold the parents responsible for raising that child. That's still a stretch, but nonetheless, it seems to be very odd. But if one takes a look at any number of the ancient Near Eastern law codes, and I've chosen two examples here, I think it becomes very clear what the Torah was doing or why the Torah had to say what it said. Now, if you take just the first example from the Code of the Hammurabi, it speaks about somewhat, not quite familiar, but a little bit familiar, from Parshas Mishpatim, if someone has someone else's child taken as a mashkam, and he beats the child, and then the child dies. So, according to the Code of Hammurabi, if it was the man's son, they shall put his son to death. So if Reuven was in charge of Shimon's son, and he killed Shimon's son, so the appropriate response to punish Reuven is to kill his son. Now that seems very counterintuitive to us. But it's only counterintuitive to us probably from a historical perspective because the influence that the Torah exercised on subsequent history. If we talk about, and it may be a misnomer, the Judeo-Christian heritage of Western society, it begins with many of the values and principles found in the Torah. So the fact that this sounds so strange to us is the product of thousands of years of having rejected this approach. But nonetheless, this was a prevalent approach in the ancient Near East. There's another example, I don't have to read it, but it's a very common way of thinking. The notion of vicarious punishment, and hence the Torah prohibits it. Now, one of the interesting things about this particular verse, I think it is I'm probably going out on a limb here, I should be more careful, but I think it might be the only verse that is essentially cited in total elsewhere in Tanakh. It's quoted later in Tanakh, and the citation is actually significant for any number of reasons, but one which I just wanted to point out now. The story is told about one of the Judean kings who was assassinated, and when his son took a charge or took the throne, so he killed his father's assassins. But the Navi in Sefer Malachim, and it's repeated in Divrei Yamim, feels the need to point out, Ves b'nei hamakim lo hemis. He didn't kill the children of the assassins, he only killed the assassins themselves. And it quotes a pasuk, Kakasu b'sefer Taras Moshe Shetziva Shem Lemar, L'yimsu avos banim v'anum nisu alavos, Ki im ish b'cheto yumas. It's interesting, it's not my discussion right now because it's not actually the way the pasuk is found in our Sefer Torah, that's a separate discussion. But I'm actually most interested in one change, which in Sefer Malachim is only in the Krei Uksiv, but in Divrei Yamim is actually in the text itself, which is, Ish Becheto, the Ksiv was Yamus. The difference between Yumas and Yamus is a binyan hufal, it means to be put to death. That refers to the action of a court. Yamus is a binyan kal, which means to die. Now, to die is ambiguous. You could die because somebody kills you, because a court kills you or executes you, or you could die just because you die. It could be a punishment from God or some other thing. In Divrei Hayamim at that point, and I sort of put it in bold, there you have B'neihem lo emis ki kakasu b'Torah b'sefer Moshe asher tziva Hashem lemar lo yamusu avos abanim uvanim lo yamusu alavos ki ish b'cheto yamusu. So there, the entire text of the Torah has the sense or the clarity that the court is the one who may not execute someone has been replaced with a broader principle, not just Yumas, but even Yamusu. A child shall not die for the sins of the parents, and a parent shall not die for the sins of a child. If I were to stop here, this should be the end of the discussion about vicarious punishment. And I want to sort of make one side comment. About the term itself. Firstly, if you Google the term vicarious punishment, you will have difficulty finding it used the way that I'm using it currently. Vicarious punishment, I think in contemporary terminology of psychology, refers to, in a sense, making an example of someone, punishing them, and seeing how others respond to that punishment and whether they're more careful. There may be a relationship between that and the biblical concept, but nonetheless, when we talk about vicarious punishment, we mean one person being punished for the sins of another person. There is also a notion of vicarious atonement, which is certainly related to the question of vicarious punishment. I'm going to avoid discussing that particular issue. I think that's more of a Jewish-Christian polemical issue. Obviously, even in Torah Judaism, biblical and rabbinic Judaism, it's clear that punishment in many contexts is linked to atonement. But for the moment, I'm not really interested in the question of the function of the punishment and whether it atones, but simply in the fairness or the justice of the punishment and whether such a punishment should be allowed to exist. So at first glance, it would appear that this discussion should be open and shut. The Torah does not subscribe at all to the notion of vicarious punishment. A court is strictly prohibited for punishing an individual for the sins of another individual. However, the picture is actually not so simple. There are two passages in Tanakh and one in Halacha that perhaps they are exceptions to the rule, but they certainly bear noting. One, which is somewhat ambiguous, is a passage in Sefer Yehoshua. In Sefer Yehoshua, we are told that in the conquest of Yericho, one Jew whose name was Achan chose to stretch out his hands and take from the booty, which was prohibited. There was a cherem. As a result of his sin, in the next battle, 36 Jewish soldiers fell in trying to conquer Ha'ai. And after Yehoshua asked God, "Why are you doing this to us?" So God said, "Chata Yisrael." So the Jewish people have sinned. And eventually the investigation leads to Achan. And they are told to kill him. And in the second, if you look in Pasuk Chaf Dalet, it's source number 6. Vayikach Yoshua es Achan ben Zerach. He took Achan ves hakesef ves haderes ves lashon hazahav. That was the booty that he had stolen from Yericho. Then ve'es bano ve'es benosav, his children, ve'es shoro ves chamaro ves tzono, ve'es ahalo. And then he took the rest of Achan's possessions, v'chol Yisrael imo, and the rest of the Jewish people, vaya'alu osam emek achar. They brought everybody up. Everybody came up to emek achar to watch. Vayomer Yehoshua, ma'achartanu yakarcha Hashem bayom hazeh. God should do to you what you have done to us. Vayirgemu oso kol Yisrael evan. So the Jewish people stoned oso, presumably Achan, the violator. They stoned him to death. Vayisrafu osam ba'esh. Then they burned them in fire. Vayiskalu osam ba'avanim. And then they stoned them to death. So the question, of course, is, who are these thems? Who is the Vayisrafu osam? And who is Vayiskalu osam? So the Gemara in Sanhedrin records a very interesting conversation. Amar le'reish galusa l'Rav Huna. He says it's written by Achan, by Yikach Yeshua Zachan Ben Zerach Hasakesef Haderes Hasashon Azhav Vesbanav Vesbanosav Esharo Veskamaro and so on. Im hu chata banav uvnosav mechatu. Now the Reish Galusa certainly read the pasuk, and the ambiguity is certainly there that they not only killed Achan, not only executed Achan, but they executed his children as well. So Rav Huna responded to the Reish Galusa, Amar Lei Litamech Hu Chata Kol Yisrael Nachatu. At the end of the pasuk, it says V'Chol Yisrael Imo. So Ela Lurdosan Hachanami Kedei Lurdosan. So basically, it was there in order to demonstrate to the people, to teach them a lesson. And just as the Jewish people had to be taught a lesson to watch what was going to happen, although I think they were there for more than watching, they were there as active participants, so too Achan's children had to watch what was going to happen, as painful as it must have been for them. So in this particular case, there is certainly some ambiguity. It's possible that this was not vicarious punishment, but a simple reading of the pasuk could very easily yield that conclusion. The case that is much more explicit, and Chazal were already troubled by this, is a passage found at the end of Sefer Shmuel. At the end of Shmuel Beis, a few chapters from the end, there was a drought for 3 years. David turns to God and says, what's going on? And God says, it has something to do with Shaul and the Givonim. And apparently, however it happened, Shaul was responsible for the deaths of a number of the Givonim, the Jews. They were Jewish in theory, not exactly Jewish, who had converted, who had been promised by Yoshua that they would be unharmed. They were basically servants in the house of the Lord, and somehow Shaul had harmed them. And the question, and now they had to be appeased. So what did they request? They wanted life for a life. They wanted, since they had lost, it seems, 7 souls, they wanted 7 of Shaul's descendants. David was greatly pained, but nonetheless, he takes a number of these people. The next pasuk, he handed them over to the Givonim. And they strung them up on the mountain before God. They all died at the same time. That was the time of year during the springtime, the early spring. All 7 of Shaul's descendants were hung as punishment for what Shaul had done to the Givonim. Obviously, this seems to be a problem because it violates the basic principle of lo yimtzu banim al avos. Chazal were indeed troubled by this. The Gemara in Yevamos, talking about this issue, says lo yimtzu avos al banim amar Rav Chia bar Abba amar Rav Yochanan mutav shete'aker os achas min haTorah vayischal Hashem shemayim b'farhesya. David HaMelech understood that this was a violation of Torah law. But his feeling was that it was better that one letter, more accurately, one pasuk of the Torah, should be uprooted rather than God's name should be desecrated. And how was this, in fact, wasn't so much a desecration, it was a Kiddush Hashem, the Gemara explains, Shayu ovrim v'shavim omer mativan shal elu. People would pass by and say, what do these people do? And the response would be, oh, halalu b'nei melachim heim. These are actually children of royalty. Umeh asu. Well, why were they hung? The answer is Pashtu Yidei Megerim Gerurim. They basically harmed the most vulnerable, least important people in society. Amru Ein Lecha Uma Sheruya Lidabek Ba'Kazah. The mark of a community that one would want to be part of is a community that protects the vulnerable, and that even when the powerful abuse the vulnerable, the powerful are punished. So this was an enormous Kiddush Hashem. This is what they would do to powerful people who acted inappropriately. Imagine what they would do to people who are not powerful. And if this is how you punish people who abuse the vulnerable, if we join and we're full members of the community, certainly we'll be protected. So the Gemara makes it clear that this particular incident is in violation of the principle of lo yumsu banim al avos, and nonetheless it was done as what we might call a horah shah. It was a temporary measure. The last halachic source, which is probably the most disturbing one, because it's not a horah shah, although it's something that probably never happened, is the issue of Ir Hanidachas. The Ir Hanidachas is a city that is described in Parshas Re'eh, in Perek, I think, Yud Gimel of Sefer Dvarim, where you have a city where most of the inhabitants worship Avodah Zarah. And as punishment, the idol worshippers, the ones who worshipped idols, are executed. The property of everybody in the city, including the people who didn't worship, is destroyed, and the city is burned to the ground. The one interesting question that's left out are the children. The Tosefta in Sanhedrin, and to the best of my knowledge, I might be wrong, but I don't think this is even quoted in the Bavli, but there's a Tosefta in Sanhedrin which writes the following: Ketane b'nei anshe Ir Hanidachas, the children of the people of Ir Hanidachas shehudchu ima. In other words, the children of the parents who were executed. Ein neharagin, they're not to be killed, they're innocent. Not surprising. Rabbi Eliezer Omer neharagin. Rabbi Eliezer says that you execute the children of the parents who are being executed. Amal Rabbi Akiva, Humani Mekayim and Asal Harach. So in the Rachim al Agdolam Arek Farnemer HaKesake, in the Rachim al Behemtam Arek Farnemer HaCharemo Savas Kalashabos Hemta. Rabbi Akiva points out that the Torah speaks in the Parsha of the Ir Hanidachas, V'nosan L'cha Rachamim Richam V'hirbecha. So where is God's mercy being given here? So Rabbi Akiva says, Elu Ketanim Shebesocha. Rabbi Akiva says, no, the mercy of God is being shown to the Ketanim. So both positions are a little bit odd, actually. Rabbi Akiva's position is odd, because it shouldn't require God's mercy to spare the Ketanim. The Ketanim should be spared because they are innocent. That is Mishpat or Tzedek, that is not Rachamim. But obviously, even more shocking is Rabbi Eliezer's position, that you actually execute the minor children of the parents who are being executed for Avodah Zarah. I don't know what quite to do with this particular position, either position, but especially the position of Rabbi Eliezer. But be that as it may, clearly these are sort of the extreme exceptions in terms of what I would describe as being normative, in terms of halacha. But there is a much clearer principle, which also seems at first glance, and maybe even not at first glance, to run afoul of the notion of la yumsu avos albanim. And that's another pasuk in the Torah, which seems to state the exact opposite. It's a pasuk that's found 4 times. It's a pasuk that we are not reciting repeatedly every morning of these days, only because we stop only a couple of words before. We stop with an akeh lo yinakeh, right? And if you continue, pokei davon avos albanim. So thankfully we leave that part out, but it's hard to escape the fact that twice in the Eser Sedibros, and twice in the Parsha of the Yud Gimel Midos, in Kisisa and Shlach, the Torah speaks about pokei davon avos albanim. The formulations are mostly the same. Al shileshim v'al ribeim. And in the Aser Sadibros, the word added lisona ai. And before we talk about Chazal's treatment of this and how you reconcile this with lo yumsu avos albanim, one of the interesting questions is, how do you read that last word lisona ai? And I think there is certainly deliberate ambiguity here. One could argue that according to the Pshat, the sona ai here are the avon avos. In other words, the avon avos, who are God's enemies because they are sinners, those sins are visited upon the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren. The alternative possibility is that God visits the sins of the parents upon the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, lison ai, when those children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren are my enemies, God speaking. But however one deals with that, certainly at first glance, pokei davon avos banim is not only disturbing, seemingly to our mind perhaps unfair, but seems to contradict lo yumsu avos albanim. The Gemara in Brachos presents the contradiction. And the Gemara in Brachos says that the resolution is as follows. V'aksiv pokeda avanav hasavanim, uksiv vanim leim solavos, v'raminan kroi adadi. We present the psukim as a contradiction. U'mishanina, and we respond, lo kasha. Hakish ochsen maseh avosem v'yadeim, hakish ein ochsen maseh avosem v'yadeim. It depends whether or not the children and the descendants follow the ways of the ancestor. If they repeat those sins, then they are punished. If they don't, then they're not punished. And that would very much pick up on the usage of the word l'sonai to refer to the banim, b'nei banim, the shilei shim, the ribeim. There are, however, two problems that should immediately become obvious. Number one, if the issue is that the children and the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren repeat the sins of the ancestor, why should this be limited to 3 generations? Remember that this is contrasted with the oseh chesed la'alafim, right? So the Torah is emphasizing the way Chazal describe it, that God's meting out punishment is more merciful than the way He rewards. He rewards up until 1,000 or 2,000 generations. He punishes only till 4 generations. But why only till 4 generations? If the great-great-grandchildren sin, they should also be punished. What's the difference? That's question number one. Question number two is that the principle is still unfair. It's still completely unfair. If a person's child sins, that person's child should be punished for that person's child's sins. They shouldn't be punished, the child shouldn't be punished for the child's sins and the parent's sins. If you commit one crime, you should be punished for one crime. If your parent committed another crime, you shouldn't be punished for 2 crimes. So, ochaz in maseh avosem b'yadayim is an answer. At first glance, it seems to be, to solve the problem and to be, make it more palatable. And certainly, it's more palatable that a wicked person be punished beyond his wickedness than an innocent person be punished beyond what he deserves. But nonetheless, it's still fundamentally unfair. And both of these questions were noted in a commentary that I'm not familiar with, but happens to be in the Bar Ilan. It's a medieval commentary of Chaim Paltiel. He might have been one of the Balei Tosos, not sure. And he points out that Bokein Avonos Hamashi Hashem Avid Sonai Perish Rashi K'Shaosim Maseh Esem Yedem. It's Chazal. Tema Im Kein Amaya Dor Revi V'Tulo Afilo Ad Kamet Dor Asnami. It should go on endlessly. Ve'od My Irya Mishum Avon Avos Tefek Le Mishum Avon Atzman. He doesn't ask the question exactly the way I did, but I think my formulation might be a sharper way of putting it. They should be punished for their own sins, not for their parents' sins. So I want to present to you sort of 3 responses to this, which again are an attempt to very much limit the notion of vicarious punishment, because poked avon avos avadim, without a corrective, is vicarious punishment. It's punishing bad people vicariously, as opposed to punishing innocent people vicariously, but it still is vicarious punishment. Ibn Ezra writes the following: Pineim halach b'darakei aviv, gam hador shlishi, gam hador harvi, Hashem lo yarich apo l'ravi. Im hayu kach ad arba doros sonei Hashem kulam. Ibn Ezra says if every generation is a hater of God, is a sonei of God, meaning they all repeat the sins, God will no longer forbear. Kibo ya'abed zecher kulam. In that generation, He will destroy all of them. Ki Hashem yizkor ma she'asa av u'ma she'asa bein u'bein abein al kain lo yarech lo ravi. So if you think about carefully what Ibn Ezra is saying here, it's not that the child is being punished for the sins of the parents. By right, hanefesh hachotes hisamus. The person sins, and they deserve to die. But God in His mercy sometimes shows erech hapayim. It's not deserved, it's not an entitlement, it's not a right. But at a certain point, God says, enough. I'm not going to forbear anymore. I'm going to punish you for what you deserve. And in this case, the Dor Revi is not being punished for the sins of the Dor Rishon and the Dor Sheni and Dor Shlishi, but the Dor Revi is no longer being given a delay that for some reason God in His mercy afforded to the earlier generations. And that is one way of doing away with the problem, because now the 4th generation is being punished justly, at least from our perspective, and only for the 4th generation's sins. Rabbeinu Bechaya writes the following. He says, "Avala'in hazeh kvar be'eru lanu razal she'akasav hazeh shel boked avavos midaber k'she'ochsen maseh avsem yedem v'yazkir akasav she'apakida hazos nimshach arba doros." The Torah tells us that this, not commemorating, but this visitation will be dragged out over 4 generations. V'hatam It's conceivable that 4 generations are living at the same time. And then he continues, the 4th generation who was able to see his parents and his grandparents and the great-grandparents and continued to sin. He continues to sin. So Rabbeinu Bechaya is saying that, in fact, if you watch the evil behavior of others and you don't take as an example that that's the wrong way to behave, you should somehow be able to intuit that. One might argue the other way. The child who witnesses a parent behaving in a certain way thinks that that's the most appropriate and normal behavior. But Rabbeinu Bechaya thinks that the great-grandchild has witnessed the wicked behavior of multiple generations, should have understood how bad that was. So when he sins, he's being punished for his ancestors' sins. He's being punished more than for his own sins because his sins are worse, because he should have known better. Again, you can agree with Rabbeinu Bechaya's analysis of what is fair and what is deserved and not deserved and what he should have learned, but from Rabbeinu Bechaya's perspective, the 4th generation is being punished because he thinks that the 4th generation's sins are worse by definition. So in fact, the 4th generation is being punished in an equitable fashion. The last approach, which I want to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure is the Chizkuni's approach throughout Chumash. I think he contradicts himself elsewhere. But the Chizkuni writes the following: Poked avon avos, sharei maso hakaved le'echad noach l'shnayim. A burden that's heavy for one person is easier for 2 people to carry. V'hakaved l'shnayim noach l'shlosha. And if it's a burden that might be heavy for 2 people, it's easier for 3 people to carry. Shem yilake adam al avono ein ha'olam miskayim. If a person receives punishment, all the punishment deserved for his or her own sin, the world couldn't survive. Elahu loke b'miktsas, he suffers a little bit as punishment. V'zaro loke b'miktsas, and his child will also suffer some of the punishment. V'humida shlosh esrei shegam hi l'tova. That's a midah l'tova. It's the 13th of the midos, not maybe in our accounting, but v'hadich siv lo yumsu avos abanim hasam bebeis ben shomata v'hacha bebeis ben shomata. Now, 2 comments are in order about the Chizkuni. Number 1, I think it's very clear from his comments here that the child is innocent, and that the mercy being shown here by punishing the child for the parent's sins is that to punish the parent would wipe out the parent. You might say the child may not have come into existence, maybe yes, maybe no, but the burden of the parent suffering, as appropriate punishment for their sin would be too much. Therefore, the Torah distributes it over multiple generations. Now, that seems very nice if you're the parent. It doesn't seem so nice if you're the descendant. But I think what's clear is that the descendant hasn't sinned, because if the descendant has his or her own sins, so then they have to also carry their part of their sin, even if they can pawn some of it off onto their children and grandchildren and great-children. So when you do the arithmetic, it's not going to work out unless you assume that these are children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who are innocent. So that is, in effect, accepting the fact that Poked avon avos abanim means exactly what it says. It's not Lisonai, it's not Kisha'ochazin Maseh Avoseim B'Yadeim. I think it's clear the Chizkuni's view, at least in this comment. Elsewhere, if you look in Sefer Dvarim, it sounds like he adopts the approach of Chazal. The other striking point, not striking point, but I think the important point, is the Pshuto Shel Mikra issue. Pshuto Shel Mikra, the resolution between these 2 verses, between Lo Yubsu Avos Abanim and Poked Avon Avos Abanim, is the difference between human agency and God. We are not allowed to punish anybody except for his or her, for what he or she did. The Ribono Shel Olam works on his own cheshbonos. We would say, to paraphrase Ibn Ezra, Rechava dato midatenu, his wisdom is infinitely greater than ours, and therefore, in his system of justice, apparently sometimes Poked avon avos abanim is acceptable. Okay, but that said, even though Chizkuni says what he says, I think it's very clear that Chazal, on the whole, rejected this idea of vicarious punishment, not only in the hands of a court, but even in the hands of God. Chazal, in effect, wished to tie the hands of the Ribono Shel Olam. There are, however, a couple of psukim later in Tanakh which don't use the language of Poked avon avos abanim, but certainly speak of the same concept. And that was actually in the title of this year. I had to, you forgive title number 10 in the source here, because there are 2 verses. One is in Yecheskel, one is in Yirmiyahu. In Yirmiyahu it states, Avos achlu voser v'shinei banim tekena, and Yecheskel it's avos Yochlu boser v'shinei habanim tekena. Apparently the precise formulation of the popular expression changed in one generation. In Sefer Yirmiyahu stating the following in one of the prophecies of Nehemiah: Vayamim hahem lo yamru od avos achlu boser v'shinei vonim tekena. Ki im ish bavono yamus kol adam hochel haboser tekena shinav. If you eat unripe grapes, you will grit your teeth. Apparently, they used to say that the parents, the avos, achlu boser, but the shinei habanim were the ones that were gritted. In other words, as Radak will quote from Sefer Echa, Avosenu chata'u ve'enam v'anachnu avonosehem savalnu. Our parents sinned, but they're not here anymore, and we are bearing the burden of their sins. Now, the way Yirmiyahu Hanavi formulates this, he doesn't attach any opprobrium to the people using the expression. One could very well read the pasuk in Yirmiyahu as, it used to be that the parents ate boser and the children suffered for it. But that will no longer be the case. The alternative reading is it's not that ever avos achlu boser and the shinei habanim were keha, but rather that's what people said. In other words, when people are suffering and they're loath to blame themselves, so they always look to blame somebody else. So they say, our parents sinned and we're suffering. It doesn't mean that's in fact how the Ribbono Shalom was implementing justice. So there are really two, the pasuk itself is really open to two readings. The Radak here writes, Lo yomru od avos achlu boser v'shinei banim tekena, mashalhu l'chotei k'moshe amru kadmonehem, avosenu chatu ve'inam v'anachnu avonosehem savalnu. It was a popular expression, like the pasuk in Echa. V'emeshu ki mimidas haborei yisbarach. It's true that amongst God's ways is poked avon avos abanim. It's true, God punishes the sins for the children for the sins of the parents. But he says, V'zeh hamidahi k'she'ochasin habanim maseh avosehem. That's only if the children follow in the ways of the parents. Uz yischabru avonos ha'avos im avonos abanim v'yipaktu al abanim avon ha'avos im avonosehem. That's only when the children repeat the sins and then they're punished in combination. That is only by that only applies to major sins, like Avodah Zarah. God promises that in the future, in the Messianic era, people will be attached and obey the will of God. And the sinners will be few. Lo yachdu chet gadol, even the sinners won't sin great and won't sin big sins. Shafilu lahem atzman yarech ha'onesh k'bosh amar v'achotei ben me'ah shana yikulal. So even for the sinners in the Messianic era, from the pasuk in Yeshayahu, that the sinner will only be cursed at age 100. Kol sheken shalei onesh havein v'chet aviv afilu yachtak aviv. The child will not be punished for the sins of his father, even if he sins like his father. Lefikach ochel haboser tiken ashinav. That's why in the future, only the one who eats the boser will his teeth become, will he grit his teeth. So even for the Radak in Sefer Yirmiyahu assumes that the people were accurate in their description. He assumes that it was b'shinei, that it was avos achlu boser b'shinei avanim tekena, but that was because it's consistent with poked avonos avanim, because the children sinned as well. In Sefer Yechezkel, one gets, and I didn't present the entire chapter here, but the impression is a little bit different. Yechezkel begins the chapter, and I've cut out most of it. Vayidavar Hashem elai lemor, malachem atem moshlemes mashal hazeh al admas Yisrael lemor. How is it that you give the following parable in the land of Israel? Avos yochlu voser b'shinei habanim tekena. Chayoni num Hashem. God swears, Hashem Elokim im yeh ochem ora mashal hazeh b'Yisrael. This mashal will be no longer amongst the Jewish people. Yechezkel then goes to lay out an extensive theology, from our vantage point, a very simple and straightforward theology, which boils down to, Hein kol nefashos li heina. I am the possessor of all souls, the knower of all souls, kenefesh hadav of chanefesh habein li heina. Hanefesh hachotes hisamos. The person who sins is the person who will die. And Yechezkel lays out generations. You have a parent who is a sinner, and the child observes the parent and learns what not to do from the parent. And the child is a tzaddik, and that child is chayo yechya. Or if a tzaddik has a child, and that child doesn't follow the ways of the father, the child will suffer for the child's sins. But basically, lachein, he concludes, hanefesh choteis samus, bein lo yisab avon ha'av, ha'av lo yisab avon ha'bein, tzidkas ha'tzadik alav tiyeh, v'rishas ha'rasha alav tiyeh. The tzaddik, the righteous person, will bear the fruits of his righteousness, and the wicked person will bear the fruits of his wickedness. The sense that one could walk away from Sefer Yechezkel is that this was a critique. Unlike in Yom Iyun, the way the Radak presented, this was actually a critique. Their theology was a false theology, they were blaming someone else. One could have actually, I think one could argue Yechezkel lends itself much more to that interpretation. And if that reading of Yechezkel is correct, it more or less means that these particular verses are irrelevant for theology in the sense that this was not actually Avos Achlavoser B'Shinei Abanim Tekena. But in what I find to be an incredibly striking and powerful passage, which in some ways opens up more than one can of worms, the Gemara in Makos, at the end of the Masechta, and I admit that I had forgotten this Gemara, even though it's a famous passage. Everybody knows Makos Daf Chavdalid because how many bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah siyumim have been made on Maseches Makos. It is one of the shortest Masechtos, and it's a fun Masechta. It's not the most difficult Masechta. But unfortunately, they never read this part. It's a few lines up on the page. Everybody knows the story of Rabbi Akiva and the foxes, running through the destroyed Beis Hamikdash. But the Gemara says something astounding. Amar Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina, Arba Gzeros Gasar Moshe Rabbeinu al Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu decreed 4 Gezeros against Klal Yisrael. Now, these 4 Gezeros that Moshe Rabbeinu was Gazar are found in the Torah. Bo Arba Neviim ubitlon. 4 different prophets came along and nullified them. I'm not sure which is more striking, stunning, and disturbing of the two halves of the statement. The notion that Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who was Gozer Gezeros in the Torah. The Rambam, I don't know how the Rambam would have read this Gemara. Or the alternative, which is that Moshe Rabbeinu or the Torah issued 4 Gezeros, and 4 Nevi'im had the chutzpah to come along and nullify them. Either way, the one that interests me is the following. Moshe Amar Poked Avon Avos Abanim. Moshe Rabbeinu said that the way God interacts with mankind is with the midah Poked Avon Avos Abanim. Bo Yechezkel ubitla. Yechezkel came along and he nullified that. Hanefesh hachoteis hi samus. The straightforward reading of this Gemara, which is in itself profound, and not really, I'm not going to expand on it. I know it's not fair. I'm just whetting your appetite that you could explore further. The notion that God's relationship to mankind, the theological underpinnings of how God interacts with us can change, is rather stunning. But in effect, that's what the Gemara is claiming. The midah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu used to relate to us with, which was Poked Avon Avos Abanim, no longer applies. Now, we are, to borrow the expression, rugged individualists. We suffer only for our own sins. I would conclude this part by pointing to one more passage, which again I think demonstrates that Chazal were not ready to be completely rid of the notion of vicarious punishment. It's a passage that, again, I think every time I read this Gemara, it disturbs me, it bothers me. But nonetheless, I think to be honest about Chazal's theology and worldview, I think one has to take this into account. Tanya, Rabbi Nassan Omer, Ba'avon Nedarim, Mesa Isha Shel Adam. If a person is lax in fulfilling vows, one of the consequences he may suffer is the death of his wife. Shenemar, Im ein lecha l'shalem, lama yikach mishkavcha mitachtecha. That's number one. The pasuk in Mishlei, which is literally actually referring to someone who borrows money and can't pay it back, to someone who's going to take your bed is going to be seized as payment. You're not going to have anything to sleep on. So metaphorically, this is understood to be if someone promises tova shelo tidor mishetidor velo tishalem, you don't pay, so therefore the mishkav is taken. Rebbe Omer, ba'avon nedarim banim, because of laxity and in vows, children die kisheim katan when they are young. Shenemar al titenes picha lachatias b'sarecha ve'al tomar lefnehem alach kishkagahi. Don't. This is actually by Tova Shelo Tidor. It's in that section, I believe. Lama yiktzov alum al kolecha. Why should God become angry over your words, over your voice? V'chibeles masei. He will destroy the work of your hands. Ezehen masei yadav shel adam hevi omer banav uvnosav shel adam. So Chazal understand that one of the possible consequences of laxity in vows, of promising and not fulfilling, is the death of a spouse, the death of children, which is very much reminiscent of Hammurabi and other codes of the ancient Near East. Namely, when you look at Hammurabi and you look at the other law codes, it's not Plony committed a murder and let's just go out and kill someone. It's typically the wife or the children who are, in the world of the ancient Near East, were almost regarded as property of the head of the household. The Torah has clearly rejected that, but Chazal seem to partially resuscitate it. Now, granted here, this is not bidei adam, this is not a beis din doing it. This is the agency only of God. But nonetheless, Chazal still seem to subscribe to a very limited notion, of vicarious punishment. I would, however, like to turn our attention to a very different kind of vicarious punishment that we've looked at until now. Something that is often forgotten, but I believe is a central part of rabbinic thinking, and not fundamentally in contradiction to lo yumsu avos abanim. It's probably one of the least popular commandments, Bisman Hazeh. In fact, it's not only today that it's unpopular. Even Chazal understood its unpopularity. I wasn't referring to the first half of that pasuk, by the way, but unfortunately that seems to be also a commonly disregarded prohibition. But I mean the second half. The obligation of tochacha. You shall rebuke your fellow person. There are multiple interpretations of what that last expression means, that you should not bear on his or her behalf sin. There are different ways of all valid meanings of reading it. But I draw your attention to one of them, which is recorded in Targum Onkelos, Velo sikabel al bilei chova, which means you are obligated to rebuke a person who is sinning so that you will not be held responsible for that person's sins. So that you will not be mekabel punishment al bilei, on that which is on his sins. The assumption here is, in effect, that Kol Yisrael Reivin Zeh b'zeh. We have a responsibility to make sure that not only do we behave properly, but that fellow Jews behave properly. And if we fail to administer the proper tochacha, the proper rebuke, we are in some way held responsible. A starker formulation of this is provided by the Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Nun Daled Amud Beis. Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Chaviva, they all said, Kol misha efshar limchos la'anshe beso, it's source 13, v'lo micha, nispas al anshe beso. Someone who has the capacity to protest against the behavior of one's family members and fails to do so is held responsible, can be punished for his family's sins. Be'anshe iro, if a person is capable, if they have the stature to get up and to rebuke the townspeople and they fail to do so, nispas al anshe iro. They can potentially be held responsible for the sins of the townspeople. B'chol ha'olam kulo, if someone is capable of getting up and making a worldwide protest, then nispas al kol ha'olam kulo. Whether or not macha and tochacha are exactly the same thing, which is a question. There may be value. Tochacha we usually assume is only when it's going to be assumed to be efficacious, if the person may or will listen. Macha might be something else, or it might be the same thing. But either way, the assumption Chazal make is that we are responsible not only for our own behavior, but for correcting or protesting the misbehavior of others. A couple of weeks ago in the Torah reading in Parshas Nitzavim, we read the pasuk Hanistaros LaHashem Elokeinu v'haniglos lanu levaneinu ad olam la'asos es kol devrei haTorah hazos. The simple reading of that pasuk is Hanistaros, those things which are hidden, that's for God to take care of. But Haniglos, those sins which we see out in the open, lanu levaneinu la'asos es kol devrei haTorah hazos. So it is for our responsibility, and the word la'asos there is probably being read with the rabbinic usage, not la'asos, but le'asos. And the term le'asos, like isui me'asin al tzedakah, means to force. Our responsibility is, even though that's a separate discussion, is kfiyah datit, is to enforce appropriate behavior. The Gemara in Sanhedrin has a very striking discussion about this. Kitanoi, hanistaros Lashem Elokeinu v'niglos lanu v'aneinu adolam. Lama nakud al lanu l'vaneinu. Why are there dots on lanu l'vaneinu? The al-ayin sheba'ad. Why are the dots there? Malamed shelo anash al hanistaros ad she'avru es Yisrael as hayarden. Devrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda's position is very striking and disturbing, and it brings us back to part 1. Rabbi Yehuda's position is that until they entered Eretz Yisrael and they made the communal covenant on Har Grizim and Har Eval, until that point, we were only punished on the niglos if we failed to enforce or to respond to public violations. But after the covenant at Har Grizim and Har Eval, we are responsible, we are punished even for the nistaros, even for the things we don't know about. Rabbi Nechemia, Amale Rabbi Nechemia, v'chi anash al nistaros la'olam. God would never punish al nistaros. Kvar nemar al kanemar ad olam. This principle of hanistaros l'Hashem Elokeinu is forever. And l'kashem shelo anash al nistaros kach lo anash onshun shebagolei ad she'avri Yisrael sayarden. So God never punished, even on the niglos until they passed over the Yarden. Then the Gemara concludes by asking, well, then why were the Jewish people punished for the sins of Achan? Because after all, presumably he stole secretly. And the answer is because his wife knew, his children knew, and nobody said anything. Now, Rabbi Nechemia's position is not so inconsistent with what we just said. Rabbi Nechemia believes that public violations demand a response by the public, demand enforcement. But private violations, the Ribono Shalom cannot hold us responsible because since we don't know about it, there's nothing we can do about it, and therefore we can't be punished for the sins of other people. Rabbi Yehuda's position, however, is very, very striking and disturbing. I remember as a student at yeshiva, many more years ago than I cared to admit, it's close to 30, we learned Sanhedrin, and we learned this Gemara, and I was so bothered by it. How do you justify Rabbi Yehuda's position? Now, unless one is going to adopt the position of vicarious punishment, and remember, this is no longer just pokei avonos abanim, this is almost random strangers. Unless one's going to adopt that position, I think Rabbi Yehuda here is offering a very powerful message, which is, even if I don't know the sins that another person is performing in private, a community comprised of individuals sets a certain tone. And therefore, when one individual, even when they sin privately, to some extent, that private sin is still attributed in some diffused sense to the community, because a community with a different tone and a different environment would not produce the sinner who sins even in private. Okay, be that as it may, all of this notion of vicarious punishment of others, because we are responsible for each other's behavior, is not simply a nice idea. Tochacha is not very commonly done today. I think the Gemara in Arachin says that Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon said, it's not clear that anybody in this day and age knows how to receive rebuke, and the other one said it's not clear that anybody in this age knows how to give rebuke. So we still have a mitzvah tochacha, but we're not very good at it. But that's sort of more in the abstract. But this notion of responsibility for one another is actually very much deeply embedded in the fabric of halacha. Firstly, we have a principle that is enunciated by the Gemara Rosh Hashanah, source number 15. Tani Abba Breid Rav Zera Kol Abrachas Kulan Apal Pi Sheyatza Motzi Chutz Mi Birchas Alech Mi Birchas Hayayin Shem Lo Yatza Motzi V'Im Yatzena Motzi. This is the principle that if I fulfill my mitzvah already, but you haven't, I can still help you fulfill your mitzvah, because even though the rule normally is that you only can help someone else fulfill their mitzvah if you are chayiv. In other words, Misha Eino Chayiv B'Davar cannot help others fulfill their mitzvah, because if you're not obligated, you can't help someone else fulfill their obligation. But as long as not all of Klal Yisrael has fulfilled their obligation, I'm still considered Chayiv. I'm still obligated in the mitzvah, even though I already blew shofar. If you haven't heard shofar and you're obligated to hear it, I haven't finished fulfilling my obligation of shofar. It's often referred to as the principle of arvus, called Yisrael Arev Mizeh B'Zeh. That one, I think most people are familiar with. But the second one is what might trouble some, but I think as a central principle of halachic jurisprudence, is a passage found in Hilchos Nidu V'Cherim in Yoreh De'ah, where the Rama writes as follows, it's the last source. If you have a person who refuses to obey the will of the community, he may have been put in excommunication already, he may have been put in Cherem, the Beis Din can deny his children a bris milah. V'shelo yikaver yavos, and he not be buried if he dies. U'legarish es banav mibeis hasefer v'ishto mibeis haknesses. They can throw his children out of the schools, and they can chase his family, his wife, out of the beis haknesses, ad sheyikabel alav hadin, until he accepts to do what he is obligated to do based upon the ruling of Beis Din or the authorities of the community. This is a particularly striking formulation, but I believe that this notion is not an outlier. This is a, fundamentally speaking, accepted principle halachic jurisprudence. In practical terms, what this means is that schools and communities may sometimes, with justification, make decisions that are detrimental to the individual for the benefit of the larger community. Often it comes up when there's a problem with a particular child in school because of the child's behavior, because of issues with the family. And often people rise to the defense and say, but you're going to deny that child a Jewish education. How can you do that? And the answer is, halacha recognizes that the needs of the community, of the larger school community, the larger community generally, often override the needs of the individual. I think that also this dictates the way we should be funding our yeshivas in the community. The way we do it is the pay-as-you-go, the user model. But that fundamentally is not in consonance with Torah values. When one examines Hilchos Tzedakah, of course there's an obligation upon an individual, but at the same time there are communal institutions, the Kuppah and the Tamkoi, with communal officials, the Gabayim and the Tovei Ha'ir, who ultimately oversee them and ensure that every individual is contributing in accordance with his or her capability and obligation. I began by observing what I would term, I didn't use this term, the countercultural nature of Torah. Lo yumsu avos abanim and many other things in the Torah are a response against the contemporary culture. And I did this with respect to vicarious punishment. But the pendulum, it seems, has now swung in the opposite direction. And we would be wise to remember that if they say to you, Chachma bagoyim tameh, if there is wisdom in the nations, believe. But Torah bagoyim al tameh, if there's Torah, you shouldn't believe it. It is Torah that should dictate our fundamental values, not the surrounding culture. Western culture, and in particular the strain found in the United States, places enormous emphasis on the individual. The American concept of rugged individualism is often held up as some kind of model to be emulated. Torah Judaism is assuredly not communist, but it is very strongly communitarian in its outlook. Not a paternalistic communitarianism, but one born out of the responsibility of the individual to the klal. As a rule, from the Torah perspective, we speak not of rights, but of duties and obligations. The inviolability of my property is an outgrowth of your obligation of lo tignovu, not to steal, and the prohibition of damaging my property, not out of a right that I have to my property. Clearly, many of the prohibitions of the Torah have the effect of creating rights for individuals, but those are rarely absolute, and we should not forget that they ultimately originate in duties, not in rights. We stand now 4 days before Yom Kippur. The Gemara in Yevamos, at the end of the 4th chapter, records the story, the Agada, of the death of Yeshayahu Hanavi. Ironically, Menashe HaRasha put him on trial for blasphemy. He accused him of contradicting the words of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu said, Mi kashem Elokeinu b'chol kareinu elav. God is always available to listen to us, to listen to our prayers, to listen to our supplications. But Yeshayahu said, Dirshu Hashem b'hi matza'o. You should seek out God when He's available. Not b'chol kareinu elav, not whenever we call. So he eventually killed Menashe. He killed Yeshayahu. But the Gemara was bothered by the contradiction. And the Gemara's response is, Lo kasha, ha b'yachid, ha b'tzibur. B'chol kareinu elav, God is always available, is to the community. However, b'hi matza'o, when God is only sometimes found, that is to the yachid. The Gemara then asks, when is that time that God is available to the yachid? The answer is the Asar Yamim shebein Rosh Hashanah leYom HaKippurim. Despite that fact that the Ribono Shel Olam is more available to the individual in these 10 days, nonetheless, if you look at the Vidu of Yom HaKippurim, when we clap the Al-Chetz, it's not Al-Chetz shechatasi lefanecha b'lashon hara. It's Al-Chetz shechatanu lefanecha b'lashon hara. When you have a Tanis Tzibur, there's a mitzvah to include everybody in the tefillah, including the Rishonim. We are one community. So despite the fact that God is available to the individual, we only come before him as part of a larger klal. And this is something that I think we need to remember. In the merit that we adopt this approach, that we recognize that we are part of the klal, may we and all of Klal Yisrael be zocha to a Gemar Chasima Tova. If there are any, I'm happy to take questions.